There's a reason ancient warriors didn't carry baggage, physical or emotional. Spartan soldiers lived with what could fit in a single satchel. Why? Because anything more was a liability. Today, we don't march into battle with shields, but we carry emotional clutter that weighs just as heavily. One of the heaviest burdens? Separation anxiety, the fear of being without, being alone, or being left behind. But what if the Spartan way held the key to unloading this fear? In this video, we journey through the lens of Spartan minimalism, a stripped-back, resilient lifestyle rooted in self-discipline, simplicity, and stoic endurance. This isn't about owning fewer things just for the aesthetic. This is about reclaiming your inner stillness by learning to detach, to live lighter, and to grow stronger. Stick around, because by the end, you'll see how less can actually make you feel more complete, not more alone. Especially when the world, and your own mind, keep trying to convince you otherwise. There is a quiet war waged inside most of us, a gnawing fear of letting go. Not just of objects or people, but of the illusion of control, the comforting familiarity of cluttered thoughts and chaotic routines. And in this war, separation anxiety becomes a loyal companion. It whispers that we are incomplete without constant connection, that absence equals abandonment, and that simplicity means loss. But if we turn our gaze to the harsh hills of ancient Laconia, where the Spartans forged their philosophy not in words but in endurance, a different truth begins to emerge. The Spartan mind was not one built on possession. It was shaped by preparation. They were taught not only to survive with less, but to thrive in scarcity. This was not deprivation, it was freedom. From childhood, Spartan boys were trained to live apart from their families, sleeping on reeds, owning almost nothing. It was brutal, but deliberate. The goal wasn't cruelty. It was to strip away dependency and replace it with inner strength. In many ways, their earliest lesson was this: true resilience is born not from what you hold on to, but from what you're willing to release. Today, we find ourselves attached to more than just people. Our phones buzz with artificial intimacy. Our homes are filled with comfort objects meant to soothe a fear we rarely name. We clutch onto memories, conversations, messages, items, each one a tether, a thread tying us to the illusion of safety. And when that thread is threatened, when someone leaves, when something breaks, when silence replaces noise, separation anxiety surfaces like a storm. But what if the storm was not something to run from, but something to walk through, carrying only what truly matters? Spartan minimalism invites us to question what we cling to, not out of cruelty, but out of compassion for our own mental health. When we begin to shed the layers of emotional dependency, a kind of sacred space opens up. In that space, we find something rare: clarity, stillness, the ability to stand alone without feeling lonely. This is not cold isolation, it's the warmth of autonomy. And the more we practice living with less, physically, emotionally, spiritually, the less we fear absence. We no longer crumble when a connection fades, or when silence stretches a little longer than expected. We begin to recognize that strength isn't found in accumulation. It's discovered in the beautiful austerity of letting go. Next, let's leave the mind and enter the home, the silent battlefield of hidden attachments. Walk into a modern home, and you'll find walls lined with photos, trinkets on every shelf, drawers brimming with just-in-case items. The space is lived in, yes, but often, it's also emotionally burdened. For many, the home becomes a reflection of inner chaos. A safe place, ironically cluttered with things that trigger stress. But contrast that with the Spartan dwelling, bare, functional, quiet. Theirs was not a home built for comfort, it was built for clarity. Because when your environment is stripped to its essentials, your mind begins to follow. Separation anxiety often blooms in places saturated with meaning. We assign stories to old objects, relationships to inherited items, obligations to spaces we feel we must maintain. It's in the dusty corner filled with a loved one's belongings we haven't touched in years. It's in the closet full of clothes that no longer fit the body, but cling tightly to our identity. These items whisper, "Don't let go. You'll forget. You'll lose something important." And so we keep them, not because we need them, but because we fear what their absence might mean. The Spartan home offered an alternative, a place where each object served a clear purpose and nothing more. Their rooms did not seek to comfort through abundance, but to empower through function. By reducing the distractions within their walls, they trained their senses and sharpened their presence. The very space they inhabited became a tool for mental resilience. There were no souvenirs of the past, no placeholders for what once was. There was only now, only what was needed in the present moment. This kind of minimalism is not cold or impersonal. It is deeply intentional. Imagine entering a room where everything has been chosen, not just placed, where the emptiness itself feels like an embrace, not a void. That is the essence of Spartan minimalism. The home stops being a museum of memory and transforms into a sanctuary of the self. And as you learn to remove what no longer supports your clarity, you discover something unexpected. The silence becomes soothing. The space becomes sacred. And the absence you once feared becomes a form of freedom. Because when your home no longer anchors you to the past, it begins to lift you into the present. It teaches you to live without fear of disconnection. It becomes a companion in your growth, not a prison of your comfort. Now let us step outside the home, into the rhythm of everyday life, where routines often mask our deepest fears of being left behind. If you observe the patterns of modern life, they pulse with repetition: morning alarms, coffee cups, hurried commutes, digital scrolls, late-night fatigue. Beneath this familiar rhythm lies something deeper, a dependency on predictable distractions to anchor a restless mind. We are creatures of habit not just because habits are efficient, but because they provide an illusion of control. And when that control slips, when the routine is interrupted or the flow disrupted, anxiety creeps in like a shadow. Especially the kind we rarely speak of, separation anxiety from routine itself. But Spartan minimalism offers a jarring and transformative counter-rhythm, one born not from comfort, but from cultivated discomfort. The Spartans were not addicted to structure, they were devoted to discipline. Their days were not driven by convenience, but by conscious difficulty. Their training cycles were built to disorient, to break monotony, and to breed resilience through unpredictability. They weren't controlled by habits, they controlled their response to change. There was no panic when plans shifted, no spiral when things were taken away. Because their identity wasn't rooted in routine, it was forged in adaptation. This contrast matters deeply today. We often mistake productivity for peace, filling our schedules with tasks to avoid stillness. We attach ourselves to rituals, not because they nourish us, but because they numb the fear of what we might feel without them. When the morning run is missed, when the work rhythm breaks, or when we sit alone without notification or noise, we feel an odd sense of loss, an anxious silence. Spartan minimalism asks, what happens when you let go of the ritual and remain whole? To embrace the Spartan rhythm is to welcome interruption. It is to seek variation, to invite discomfort, and to test the boundaries of your own emotional self-reliance. Instead of fearing the break in routine, you begin to see it as training, a sharpening of the soul. The minimalist life, lived through the Spartan lens, is not one of fixed rituals, but of fluid strength. It's waking without needing, moving without clinging, and pausing without panic. And in this new rhythm, quiet, adaptive, deliberate, you'll find a strange and powerful liberation. Separation no longer breeds anxiety. It births insight, because you are no longer afraid to fall out of step. You have learned, finally, to walk untethered. Next, we turn to perhaps the most concealed battlefield of all, the relationships we think we need to survive, but which often survive by keeping us dependent. In the ancient Spartan world, connection was never about constant closeness. It was about enduring loyalty forged through mutual strength. Brothers in arms trained together, but they were just as prepared to stand alone. They knew something we often forget. True connection does not require possession, proximity, or perpetual reassurance. Yet in our modern lives, relationships, whether romantic, familial, or social, often become subtle cages of dependency. And at the heart of that dependency lies a familiar ache: separation anxiety. We fear being alone. We panic when a message goes unanswered, when someone drifts away, when silence replaces warmth. We tell ourselves we crave connection, but too often, we crave certainty, control, and the illusion that others complete us. And so we hold tightly, sometimes too tightly. But Spartan minimalism offers another path. It whispers that bonds should be based not on fear, but on freedom. That presence should be voluntary, not obligatory. That love, in its purest form, never clutches. The Spartans sent their sons away to be shaped by absence. Husbands parted from their wives for years of training or war. These weren't cold people, they were clear. They understood that distance, when honored properly, does not erode connection. It strengthens it. It tests the roots, revealing which ties are based on shared strength and which are just emotional crutches disguised as love. This is the lesson of Spartan minimalism in human connection. Don't measure relationships by their constant presence. Measure them by their resilience in absence. Who still stands with you when you don't reach out? Who respects your solitude instead of fearing your silence? When we declutter our emotional lives, we begin to let go of attachments that are built on need rather than mutual respect. And in doing so, we experience something rare: freedom within closeness. Spartan bonds were forged not by merging identities, but by sharpening individuality. In this way, minimalism becomes not a barrier to love, but a purifier of it. It teaches us to be with others without losing ourselves. It allows room for solitude within intimacy and strength within vulnerability. When we finally stop clutching others out of fear, we begin to experience connection without anxiety. Not lesser love, but love without conditions. This is the Spartan gift to modern hearts: to know that you can hold space for someone and still stand entirely on your own. And now, we turn to the final frontier of Spartan minimalism, the realm of identity, where letting go isn't about possessions or people, but about the self you no longer need to be. There is a quiet crisis in the modern world, often unnoticed but deeply felt, a kind of spiritual clutter. Not of things, not of people, but of selves. We carry identities like armor, career titles, social roles, labels we didn't choose but still defend. And the more we layer on, professional, emotional, digital, the more fragile we become when even one thread begins to unravel. Separation anxiety isn't always about others. Sometimes, it's about the unbearable fear of being apart from the version of ourselves we think we must maintain. But the Spartans, in their austere clarity, show us another way. To be Spartan was not to build identity. It was to burn away what was unnecessary until only the essential remained. A warrior was not defined by his appearance, his possessions, or even his reputation. He was defined by how little he needed to remain complete. It was not a loss, it was a return. In their discipline, they carved away the ego, the pretense, the distractions. And what emerged was a self unshaken by absence, untouched by status, unfazed by solitude. We, by contrast, fear stillness because it reveals too much. Who are we when there is no audience? When the job is gone, the phone is off, the feedback fades. These moments, though uncomfortable, are precisely where Spartan minimalism begins its deepest work. It asks us to stand without our armor, to be still without reaching, to listen without reacting. It is here, in the stripped-back silence, that a new self quietly introduces itself, less adorned, but more aligned. And that alignment births strength. When you are no longer tied to a single identity, you become free to move, to evolve, to adapt. You are no longer anxious about change, because your sense of self is not built on externals. Spartan minimalism doesn't just declutter the physical, it dissolves the rigid structures of the ego. It reminds us that we are not the labels we wear, but the values we live by. In shedding these layers, what remains is the most resilient form of identity, one rooted in principle, not performance. One that does not panic when the world changes or when solitude knocks. It simply breathes, calmly and completely, because it knows the self is not something to defend, it is something to distill. So where does all this leave us? In a world frantic to hold on, Spartan minimalism teaches us the boldest act is to let go. Let's bring it all together. The Spartans didn't conquer by clinging. They endured by surrendering what didn't serve. In a world that rewards accumulation and fears solitude, Spartan minimalism offers a forgotten strength, stillness without dependence, connection without clinging, identity without excess. When you remove the noise, the anxiety loses its grip. You no longer fear what might leave, because you've already chosen what truly stays. And perhaps that's the ultimate peace, to stand alone, not in isolation, but in full alignment. If this philosophy stirred something in you, there's more. Our journey doesn't end with the Spartans. From modern microspaces to ancient ancestral wisdom, Serenityism explores how minimalism isn't about owning less, but living more wisely. Explore the other playlists on this channel, Microtopia, Hollow Era, and beyond, each offering a new lens to simplify your world and fortify your mind. Click, breathe, and begin where less finally feels like more.